Hey everybody, welcome to Q&A Live. It is Friday, and the question we're asking is a very common question. And I didn't know how common it really was until I started working with youth. And then I was kind of surprised initially because kids kept asking the question. And then as I thought about it, well, it makes sense because this generation has absolutely been raised by secular, staunch atheists many times, especially in the school systems. They're just coming after him. And so the question has been raised by Bertrand Russell, it's been raised by Richard Dawkins, it's been raised by, you name it, they brought it up. And I'll show you some quotes to back that up. But I want to show you this little video here because the questions that I'm initially answering in my section of the Q&A Live are the questions that I've actually just recorded from students asking me this. And so these are real students that we were out there and before we started Spiritual Emphasis Week, what are the questions that are keeping you from selling out? And so these are the ones, so check it out.
Just 6,000 years old, or
if God has always existed,
Jewish, how can he be white with blonde hair and blue eyes?
I'd just like to know how if we came from two people being Adam and Eve, how there's so many people that look so different.
So the first one that we answered when my wife and I were together was that, the age of the earth, because it is still a very big question. Number two was the gentleman that talked about, well, if God has always existed, he goes on to say, and he created everything, then who created him? And by the way, that's the same question, as I said, some of the staunch atheists have asked as well. And I think that's where these guys are getting it from. Let's take Bertrand Russell, for instance. He says, if everything must have a cause, then God must have a cause. And that comes from his book that he had written, Why I'm Not an Atheist, and he's got his manifestos in there, and it's pretty popular still, even to this day. Another person, Christopher Hitchens, you've heard of him, he says the postulate of a designer or creator only raises the unanswerable question of who designed the designer or created the creator. Religion and theology have consistently failed to overcome this objection. And then Richard Dawkins, he can't be outdone. So Richard Dawkins, he puts it like this: by invoking a supernatural designer is to explain precisely nothing. Why? Because it leaves unexplained the origin of the designer. And so, he's still coming at it. And there was a lady that she couldn't be left out of the bunch as well, Rebecca Goldstein. She had this to say about it. She says, who caused God? Theists offer a prime example of the fallacy of passing the buck, invoking God to solve some problem, but then leaving unanswered that very same problem when applied to God himself. Interesting. And by the way, David Mills, in his book, Atheist Universe, he asked the exact same question. He just said, hey, if God created the universe, then who created God? But there's one guy that I'm going to kind of focus off of because it brought it to the forefront for me. It's a guy who's an atheist, and he goes by the name The Friendly Atheist, and he's got a lot of videos online. He's much nicer than Richard Dawkins and Lawrence Krauss, much nicer than them. But in one of his videos specifically, he has his list of why he doesn't believe in God and the problems with Christianity. And one of them is, who created God? If God created everything, then who created God? But in the article that I found when I was doing some research for this is what he said, and I found it very interesting. He says, people may not share their doubts with friends, relatives, pastors, rabbis, or imams. They inevitably share them with Google. And man, is that the truth. If you really want to know what's going on in the culture, what's really trending, take a look at Google and see what's being searched for. But then he said this, and it was interesting. He goes on to say, every year in the United States, there are hundreds of thousands of pointed questions, most of them coming from the Bible Belt. The number one question in the country is, now these are the questions pertaining to God. He goes on to say this, top searched question online from people who are questioning God, okay? The number one search question is, and you know where I'm going with this because it's the topic that we're addressing today, is who created God? Now, you'll see the other ones here. You got who created God. By the way, notice 25,142 times a month this question is asked. So, wow. It's still a big one. And it goes on to say, why does God allow suffering? We're going to address that. Why does God hate me? We're going to address that. Why does God want us to worship him? Why doesn't God answer my prayers? Why does God not show himself? So those were the top asked questions, but we're dealing with number one today, and we'll deal with the rest as we get along here. But in order to do that, I decided I'm going to let debunked videos do the heavy lifting. I mean, we created a debunked video specifically on this. If God created everything, then who created God? So I'm going to show you the debunked video this week and let it do the heavy lifting. But then I'm going to come back and just make a couple points to wrap it all up with, because I think that video did just a really super good job. And so then we'll flesh it out at the end. So hang on, put your seatbelt on, because it's going to come quick, but I want to show you this video and then we'll talk about it when we're done. Here we go.
You know, people misunderstand all kinds of things about the nature of God, which leads them to say interesting things like, if everything that begins needs a beginner, then so does God. Or, hey man, if every effect has to have a cause, then God has to have a cause. Or even, if God created everything, then something or someone had to create God. There it is, a boom, mic drop. No mic drop. Pick it up, because those statements don't merit such a thing. And here's why. Basically, we got 3 French hens, 2 hurl above the far ridge as they tear free. What? Yep, shooting them down nice and easy. 1 ultimate question, kind of spun as 3, bundled briefly by Bub, because brevity bespeaks benevolence, benefiting belabored beholders. And pull! Statement et une, as no one from France would say, but I ain't French. If everything that begins needs a beginner, then so does God. And that would be a great point if God began, but the statement says everything that begins needs a beginner, not that everything needs a beginner. God didn't have a beginning, so he doesn't need a beginner. He is, as the Bible declares, eternal and everlasting. On to el statementavo dedoso, which probably doesn't mean what I think it should. If every effect has a cause, then God has to have a cause. Well, again, that would be a good point if God was the effect of something, but he wasn't, because nothing caused God. He's the uncaused cause who causes all other causes. This means he's the only necessary, uncreated anything. All other things are created and contingent, therefore in need of said cause. And so we're here at La Statementanto de Finale, as once spoken by nobody from Italy or anywhere else, I imagine. If God created everything, then somebody or something had to create God. Well, that doesn't really follow, because again, God is eternal and unmade. Sorry to be repetitive, but nobody or no thing created God. And he certainly didn't create himself, because that would be, well, absurd. He is the one who created all things. Colossians 1:16 puts it this way: by him all things were created, in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible. And we all actually know this just by looking around at things. That's why Romans 1:19 and 20 says, for what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. This means if you pondered the world and the universe, you'd come to the common sense conclusion, at least at minimum, an immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent, spaceless, and timeless being created the universe. Whoa, now hold on a cotton-picking minute. Why would I come to that conclusion, you might ask with fervor? Well, because we know the universe began to exist, and that means it had a cause. So then, what caused it? Well, you got 3 choices, really. You got nothing, you got an abstract, or you got a being with the aforementioned qualities. Unprovable multiverses or crystals on the backs of turtles won't do. Now, it seems to me that Billy Preston dismantles the first option when he's saying, nothing from nothing, leave nothing. Yeah, no, don't quit the day job, but what he spins is true, my brothers and sisters. You get nada from nothing, because nothing is, as Aristotle asserted, the thing rocks dream of. So what about an abstract something? Say like the number 4. Well, last I checked, the number 4 can't talk, can't eat, can't think, can't do much of anything. So that leaves us with the being with the same characteristics described in the Bible that we'd expect if we never read the Bible, and that being is God, the creator and sustainer of the universe. He was not made, he was not caused, he was not created. He had no beginning, he had no end, he had no superior, he has no equal, he has no boundaries, he has no limits, he has no weakness, he's infinite, he's eternal, he's all-powerful, he's the Alpha and Omega, he's all-knowing, he's spaceless, he's timeless, he's spirit, and unlike Visa, he's everywhere. Period. Might be nice to drop that mic now. And there it is. This unfounded claim that God needs a beginner or a cause, or that somebody made God, has been, as it were, hitherto and henceforth, debunked. Adios.
So there you have it. We're done. We finished up early this time. Thank you. Next Monday, we'll see, and Dan's going to address the question. No. You're not convinced? Well, let me flesh it out just a little bit more. And by the way, I'm not going to go through all of it. I just think there's one point that we really need to flesh out. And that's this statement that everything that begins needs a beginner. Well, I agree. Absolutely agree. Because think about it. A book, You need somebody to write the book, then to bind the book, and then to sell the book. You need that to make a movie. You need somebody to do the film. You need somebody to star in it. You need somebody to write the script, or at least make up the words as they go along. Kind of like what I do here a lot of times. But you need somebody to help you to do something that has a beginning. But that's not God. That's not the God that we're talking about. The God that we're talking about is omniscient, omnipotent. He's eternal. He doesn't have a beginning. And so when they make this statement that everything that begins needs a beginner, then so does God. No. No. That's not an accurate statement, because God doesn't have a beginning. Take a look at what Romans 1:19-20 says about him. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. So, from creation alone, we can know that there's a creator. It's very clear in the scripture. And here's the point that I want to kind of leave you with. Think about this. Christian and non-Christian, we both have the same problem. Who created what? That uncaused cause. Both of us have to have something that has existed for all eternity that has no beginning. We both have to have it. It doesn't matter if you believe in God or not. So this is the question. Which one makes the most sense? I mean, something that came from nothing, or everything that came from something? This is the question that we have to struggle through. And by the way, in one of our media corrections coming up, we actually address that whole issue on how do you get something from nothing. We fleshed that one out big time. But for this one, I just want to tell you that I don't care if you don't believe in God or not. You still have to answer the question. Who created my God? I'll ask you the same question. Who created your gas? We both have to have something that has existed for all eternity. So Bertrand Russell, very interesting. I brought him up in the beginning when he said that everything must have a cause and God must have a cause. He was in a debate and he was challenged on, well, then what created the universe? How did we get the universe? And this is what he said. I found this very interesting. I should say that the universe is just there and that's all. Boy, I'm going to tell you what. Non-Christians wouldn't let a Christian get away with that. Well, God was just there and that's it. No, you have to explain who created God. No, I don't. That's not the biblical God. The biblical God has no beginning, has no end. He's the Alpha, he's the Omega, he's the first uncaused cause. Nothing created him. By him, for him, everything was created. You don't like that? Then here's what I do. I put the ball in your court. The alternative is, in the beginning, nothing somehow turned into gas, which somehow turned into something that's alive, to eventually become everything that we see. So who created God? Nobody. He's the first uncaused cause. So you get to make a choice here today. In the beginning, God, or in the beginning, gas. If you go with gas, Bino will help you, but I'm not going there. That's another topic for another time. So I would just encourage you, keep digging, keep looking, keep sending stuff in to us, and we'll do our best to try and answer the questions. But don't be intimidated. Don't be intimidated. Thanks for joining us. Stay bold.